Hello and welcome. You're watching Fineprint with me, Ramesh Ramachandran. Tonight we are discussing about Pakistan's increasing isolation on the world stage. Now, there are no permanent friends or enemies in politics, they say, and it's no different in international relations as well. No two countries are friends or foes forever. It's about striking the right deal at the right moment. So it should not come as a surprise at all when China drops its support for Pakistan in Paris. Terror haven Pakistan is now joining the International Hall of Shame.
Alone at Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, the global anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing watchdog. Time for shame, not celebration. After FATF fiasco, government looks inwards. Pakistani media are mortified, ashamed at the global embarrassment. Newspaper editorials are warning Pakistan. There are no permanent friends or enemies in geopolitics. The judgment has been pronounced. Pakistani politicians are absolute disaster. Even the powerful military not immune to criticism. And it's all thanks to Pakistani establishment's love of terrorists. Last week, Financial Action Task Force, or the FATF, gave Pakistan 3 months. 3 months to change its behavior and comply with sanctions against terrorists it harbors. And yet, it is certain that Pakistan will be back on FATF grey list in June. It will hurt Pakistan's economy. It will hurt its borrowing ability. It will make global banks rethink their presence in the country. In short, the move will do a substantial damage to Pakistan. As Pakistan yet again awaits reinduction into the Global Hall of Shame, the FATF grey list, 3 years after it was given a chance and taken off the watch list. And even the defeat comes at a huge diplomatic cost. Pakistan's all-weather friend China dropped the support. Saudi Arabia backed off. Russians gave up their opposition. Only Turkey remained a staunch supporter as the global body was deciding Pakistan's fate in Paris. That's why Pakistani media are livid, unsparing in their criticism. And why not? After all, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Khwaja Asif was quick to jump to conclusions, tweeting away a victory that was not to be given as closed-door discussions took place in Paris. The global presence is mounting. India and America are pressurizing Pakistan to give up its state policy of using terrorists as assets. Even Europe has run out of patience. Even sensible Pakistanis are demanding the same. And still, the question remains, will Pakistan give up terrorists it raised over the decades?
And joining me on Fineprint this evening is a very distinguished panel of guests. Einar Tangen joins me from Beijing. Einar Tangen is a political and economic commentator. Also joining me in a bit from India will be Dileep Sinha, a former Indian ambassador and columnist. And from Pakistan, journalist Ahmad Shaheen. Coming to you, Einar Tangen first. Einar, explain to the viewer tonight as to why and how China behaved the way it did at the Financial Action Task Force meeting that concluded in Paris.
As you know, has become the new vice president of the organization, and they have decided to take a closer look at what's going on in Pakistan. I think there's obviously some disappointment. I think there was, as you put it, 3 years of time. And at this point, I think China is sending a red flag to Pakistan that it's time to clean up any kind of support for terrorist actions that they find.
Einar Tangen, you call it the red flag. What about China's all-weather relationship with Pakistan? Isn't it a contradiction in terms here?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, the issue here is the all-weather friendship is based on trade, and there's a long-standing tolerance for each other and a non-interference in internal affairs. But when those affairs are starting to affect the relationship itself, there's been a number of hiccups in the Belt and Road Initiative, which is very dear to China's economic plans, very important to them. And they see some foot dragging on behalf of Pakistan. They're also very concerned about the security situation. As you know, they have begun direct talks in Balochistan to try to resolve some way in which they can use this Belt and Road that they've poured so much money into. So you can expect China to put pressure on there. I also think this is a nod to India. China wants good terms with India. They would love to see India be part of the Belt and Road Initiative, or at least to be a beneficiary of it. I think it would be very mutually beneficial, but we'll have to see.
You call it a nod to India, Einar Tangen. Are we supposed to interpret this as a concession to India? But that said, China still continues to block the proscription of Masood Azhar in the UNSC. It also continues to block India's entry in the nuclear suppliers group. Then we have the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. A number of instances, the Maldives, Nepal, you name it. There are so many fault lines in the India-China relationship, and yet you call it a nod to India?
Well, quite frankly, I mean, it takes two to tango, and I think that if you look deeply into the past on these things, there's plenty of blame on both sides. These political situations, when you start arguing over pastures, which are used once a year by goat herders, does not seem credible unless you're playing nationalist cards on both sides. And I think at this time, it's time to put away these types of toys and start thinking about the future of two of the world's greatest economies, two nation states who could do better together than they can by being driven apart by other forces.
Einar Tangen, while I wait for Dileep Sinha and Amar Shaheen to join us on this discussion, I want to read out two newspaper reports from Pakistan, and then I'll come back to you with a question. One editorial in the Dawn newspaper says China and Saudi Arabia both abandoned Pakistan. And the Express Tribune of Pakistan says, and this is a quote from the article, what is more worrying is that its allies, including China and Saudi Arabia, also withdrew their support when the United States pressed for punitive action against Islamabad. And then the article goes on to say, if I can just quote again from the Dawn editorial, it says, the warnings are now pouring in continuously. Act against militant groups or risk international isolation. Pakistan would do well to heed them for its own sake. Your thoughts, Einar Tangen?
You know, the media in Pakistan and India tends to take a sensationalist view of things. I do think that China, as I said, has sent up a red warning flag. This is not the only flag that they've sent out. There's been a number of warnings. And I think at this time, Pakistan has to start thinking about its complex relationship internally. I've heard many explanations from Pakistan about how difficult it is to unwind the spaghetti that they have in terms of political and customs, religious, you name it, cultural things that seem to be interminable, but something has to be done. There cannot continue to be funding or harboring of terrorists, and if they are there's going to have to be a stop to it. I think China is doing its bit to say, look, we can be friends with somebody, but we are not going to tolerate any kind of action which is leading towards more global terrorism.
All right, I'm told we are now joined by both Dileep Sinha and Amar Shaheen. If I can come to you, Amar, first. Dale Carnegie wrote a book many, many decades ago, How to Win Friends and Influence People. You think Pakistan's lobbying effort at the FATF in Paris was an example of how not to win friends and influence people?
I wouldn't blame the lobbying effort as such as a whole. I mean, it's a difficult thing to lobby people on. Of course, Pakistan needs to do more when it comes to controlling the finances of terrorist organizations and terrorist sympathizers. So getting, starting an international campaign to get support on that is an enormous task. And countries will look at their own outlook rather than blindly supporting an ally or a friend. And this is what the GCC in China have done. They've looked at their own reputation and they chose not to support Pakistan to be not to be on this list at all. They did show initially their support, which in a way allowed Pakistan to have this leeway of 3 months where Pakistan can do more to show its seriousness towards curbing terrorism and its finances.
Are you telling me, Amr Shaheen, that Pakistan and the Pakistani media was not at all surprised by this development?
It wasn't, I wouldn't say it was very expected, but it wasn't a big surprise that countries like China and the GCC and Turkey would go their own way and say, I mean, I support Pakistan. I am a Pakistani myself. But I say, yes, Pakistan needs to do more when it comes to taking care of how these terrorist organizations are being financed and regulating these finances. So
right.
So Pakistan would want the same, I would expect.
Right. Dilip Sinha, if I can come to you now. Ambassador Sinha, there we saw China withdraw support to Pakistan at the last minute. Saudi Arabia, which is not a member, but the GCC also withdrew support. Only Turkey remained as the lone supporter of Pakistan, the FATF. What does that speak to you about Pakistan's so-called increasing isolation on the world stage?
Well, it speaks a lot, but also speaks for the kind of pressure that America has been able to bring on these countries, especially the GCC countries. On China's action, one can only speculate as to why China has taken this action. Of course, it's a very, very mild action. It's a little gentle rap on the knuckle, Pakistan, because it's not yet been put on the grey list. It's only on the pre-grey list stage, where it has to submit its report on the action it proposes to take by May. If it doesn't submit its report, then they may consider stricter action. If it submits its action plan, then it may be put on the grey list, but that will be only to keep it under observance for the implementation of that action plan.
Ambassador
so
Sinha,
it is not such a great punishment on Pakistan.
Ambassador Sinha, you call it a gentle rap on the knuckle for Pakistan. But Einar Tangen, who is joining us on the discussion from Beijing, calls it a nod to India and possibly as a concession to India at the FATF. But that said, how do you read China's policy and position on the FATF at Paris, especially given its intransigence on the issue of nuclear suppliers group, on Masood Azhar, on CPEC? So how should one read China's stand at the FATF in Paris?
Well, as I said, China's action, one can only speculate. Your expert from Beijing said that China is perhaps a little cut up with Pakistan because of the terrorism there. One Chinese shipping employee was killed in Karachi earlier this month.
Right.
But there's two other possible explanations for this. One is that China follows a transactional policy on its vote. In the Security Council, we have seen that China has refrained from the veto at times because of extracting concessions elsewhere. And this is possible in the FATF. It is also possible that China doesn't mind Pakistan coming a little more under its fold, because the more Pakistan gets isolated, the more it will depend upon China for its assistance, for its financial and economic well-being.
Right. Amr Shaheen,
so
if I can come to you now, Ambassador Sinha, your point is well taken. If I can bring Amr Shaheen back in the discussion. Amr Shaheen, if I can read to you from the Dawn editorial this morning, it concludes by saying, the warnings are now pouring in continuously. Act against militant groups or risk international isolation. Pakistan would do well to heed them for its own sake. Your thoughts?
I think, yes, there is a sense of isolation for Pakistan. Some of the friend countries are not just blindly supporting Pakistan in this drive against the terror financing. Some of them are being real friends. Real friends tell you what's wrong with you and how you should not do wrong things. Pakistan, I think, needs this nudge to move in the right direction. And I think as far as Chinese support is concerned, China has a vested interest in this too, a business interest. China wants Pakistan to take security and terror financing seriously. So it is a hypothesis from your side the Chinese might be happy with the fact that something is happening which makes Pakistan take terrorist financing more seriously. But let's not read too much into this whole phenomenon. Everyone's watching out for their interests. People who support Pakistan can support either in just denying the fact that there is a terrorism problem in the country, or practically support the drive against terrorist funding in Pakistan.
Einar Tangen, if I were to ask you, why is China, or why does China speak with a forked tongue on this issue? On the one hand, it withdrew support to Pakistan at the last minute of the FATF. On the other hand, it continues to block the proscription or the ban on Masood Azhar, who India says is responsible for a number of attacks in India.
Well, once again, I mean, it's a matter of perspective. You see it from the Indian perspective. China says that this is a matter of internal discussion, internal matter to Pakistan. But let me clear something up that the ambassador addressed. He said that it would be in China's interest if, in fact, Pakistan became weaker and more engulfed in China's influence. And I would dispute that. Client states do not do well over the long period of time. Remember, this is a Belt and Road initiative that is supposed to last for 100 years and more. So it would not be smart for Beijing, and I think we'll all acknowledge that they're very good planners, very savvy in terms of how they plan things out, for them to have an isolated Pakistan that will only lead to more problems and instability in the region. The best thing is for them to solve this, to get Pakistan clearly on the side of fighting against terrorism, not harboring it. And I think this is what China is trying to do. And when I say a nod to India, I think what I meant was that they're taking a responsible role on the world stage, and that this is a sign to everybody that this is the way each country should conduct themselves.
Ambassador Sinha, Einar Tangen says issues such as China's reluctance to ban or to support India's bid to ban Masood Azhar is a quote-unquote internal matter of Pakistan. Would you subscribe to that view at all?
Pakistani terrorism for a very long time now. And we don't see any influence or effort by China to try and see if Pakistan could curb this. We have seen other countries put in a little bit of effort to curb Pakistan's sponsorship of terrorism, but that certainly hasn't come from China. When Pakistan was earlier on the grey list between 2012 and 2015, I don't think there was any indication from Pakistan that its activities of terrorism against India had been curtailed in any measure at all.
Ambassador Sinha, you've served in Geneva and have seen multilateral meetings from close quarters. Explain to me, or the viewer, if you will, the dynamic when such matters are taken up at these multilateral meetings. How about forging a consensus? What goes into the actual voting process or the consensus building process in such matters?
Well, as I said, a lot of the vote is used for transactional purposes. You strike deals for completely unrelated issues. In this particular case, China wanted to become the vice president, so it's quite possible that the other countries removed their objection, and China felt that its international stature goes up if it becomes vice president of this very elite body called the FATF.
Right.
And India, in fact, congratulated China immediately after it was elected vice president.
Indeed, and that's a point I want to take across to Einar Tangen in Beijing. Einar Tangen, was there a quid pro quo here? That China gets the vice presidentship and it relents on the issue of listing Pakistan in the FATF?
Well, apart from prestige, I don't know that there's any particular advantage to China to be taking a lead role, especially when it's going to put it opposite the side of a, quote, old-time friend. I think you really have to see this as China is trying to lead by example and take what they think is a responsible role. In this particular case, they had to acknowledge that Pakistan needs to work more on an obvious issue to the world, which is this terrorism issue, especially on the financing end. But this is not just limited to Pakistan. Some of the people who supported this There are also questions about them within the Gulf cooperation states, etc. So this is by no means a clean slate. And I understand that things are very transactional, but I think that's probably where the world has gone off on the wrong foot. Human lives are not about transactions. There should be some principles, and I would expect the ambassador of India to acknowledge that.
Right. Ahmad Shaheen, this is not the first time Pakistan will be grey-listed. It happened a couple of years ago. On that occasion, Pakistan gave no indication of clamping down or stopping the terror tap, as it were, operating on its soil. And that's a point which the Dawn editorial mentions as well. If I can quote the relevant portion from it, it says, the stop-and-go manner in which the objective has been pursued, that is taking limited action one day and then allowing matters to once again deteriorate, has now come to the end of the line as FATF prepares to grey-list Pakistan's financial system one more time in June. Are you telling me that Pakistan has not learnt its lessons? Or does not want to learn lessons from it?
I think Pakistan's policy of being reactive towards these circumstances when there is no way out, that is the time Pakistan starts taking action. Certainly Pakistan has taken action against the FIF, Jamaat al-Dawa, and previously Pakistan did take action against Lashkar-e-Taiba, all of these outfits belonging to Hafiz Saeed, the notorious Hafiz Saeed. Pakistan has taken actions. It's not that Pakistan never takes actions, but Pakistan takes these actions as a responsive tactic when things go awry. I think Pakistan, what it needs to do is, in principle, take these actions. In principle, ban outfits that are, for example, inviting ISIS to Pakistan, and not ban these organizations when it's almost too late. And Pakistan has now 3 months to avoid being put on this list. Pakistan needs to materialize these 3 months, give a clear plan of action, and even address issues that are not part of the issues being raised here, not just the financial issues, but also ideological issues, issues to do with syllabus and what we are teaching our children, what the madrasas are doing. The KPK government gave billions of rupees to the madrasa, which some of the students were responsible for former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto's murder. So Pakistan needs to address these issues as well, the issues that are raised and the ones that might be raised in the future. We shouldn't react to these circumstances. We have to make sure these circumstances are never there, because ideologically the government and the military establishment and the civil establishment have already taken care of these issues without someone from the outside telling us and infringing upon our sovereignty.
Ahmad Shaheen, I also want you to dwell a bit, if you will, on the dynamic among the media in Pakistan today, the civilian government and the military. Why I ask you is this because, again, referring to the Dawn editorial, it says the civilian government has been trying to warn the security establishment about a number of years now, including a series of meetings in late 2016, but evidently these conversations did not lead to the desired actions. What does that speak to you about the dynamic among the media, civilian government and the military?
Not too far ago, there was a phenomenon in Pakistan called Dawn Leaks, in which the information minister had to go home because there was a certain story which involved the meeting of the civilian powers and the military powers, and that information was leaked, and the Ministry of Information was required to stop that report. Obviously, civilian governments cannot do that as effectively as other centers of power, and the minister had to go home saying, I cannot tell journalists to stop a report. The dynamics are very weird when it comes to the military establishment and the civilian power, but then the media in the middle, the media has become very bipolar. A large section of the media is very nationalistic, very pro-military establishment, and very anti-democratic values and democratic government. And institutes like Dawn News are usually one of the braver institutions. There's Jung Group and Dawn News and Nawaibat Group, some of the very old institutions, media institutions in Pakistan, that still find some courage somewhere to write these things. The civilian government I see as somebody who loses out at the first stage of the battle when it comes to the power struggles between the military establishment and the media personnel, who are in a way on the side of the democracy, are the first victims of violent attacks. So people do a lot of self-censorship, and when these kind of editorials do get printed in Dawn, it is the only breath of fresh air for weeks. So yeah, it's very brave. You have to understand the dynamics of Pakistani media and the fact that printing and saying all those things in Pakistan takes a lot of courage.
Ambassador Sinha, I also wanted to ask you about Trump's South Asia strategy. Do you think the U.S., where do you think the U.S.-Pakistan relations are headed, especially in light of Washington tightening the screws, as it were, on Pakistan, especially on the issue of combating terrorism, with particular focus on Afghanistan?
Before I answer your question on that, I'd just like to respond to the point made by your expert from Beijing on the issue of China's support to terrorism and pressure on Pakistan.
Sure.
We must remember that there's another terrorist called Masood Azhar, whose listing has been blocked by China, using its position as a permanent member of the Security Council.
Right.
And that listing we have been trying for the last several years now, and that's not been permitted. Coming back to President Trump, President Trump is very keen to ensure that in Afghanistan, he's able to produce some kind of success. And that has become very difficult because of the Taliban attacks that are taking place all over the country. President Trump realizes that he can do this only if Pakistan clamps down on networks like the Taliban network that is supporting Pakistan, or the Haqqani network. And in this, Pakistan's role is extremely important, and President Trump is putting pressure the way only he can, for sure.
Ambassador Sinha, you spoke about the Haqqani network. What about those groups operating against India? What can India and the world do to lean on Pakistan to make it desist from using terror as state policy, to deny safe havens to terror groups operating against India in particular? Ambassador Sinha, are you with me? Can you hear me? All right, I'm told we'll try to fix that connection with Ambassador Sinha in a bit, but if I can bring in my other guests back in the discussion, Aina Tangan in Beijing and Ahmad Shaheen in Pakistan. Aina Tangan, on balance, how do you see the China-Pakistan relationship evolve in the immediate future, especially in light of what Beijing decided to do at the FATF?
Well, I think it's very clear that Beijing would like to see a less isolated Pakistan. Remember, creating this Belt and Road Initiative is not just simply a means to sluice resources to China and then send trade goods to Europe. It's supposed to be a highway that leads to economic prosperity along the way and helps to stabilize the nations that are involved. I mean, I think we can all pretty much agree that Pakistan, one of the keys to Pakistan is seeing it stabilize economically, to see its income rise so that you have less temptation for people who have no hope to join terrorist groups. So I think this is a very important component. I think China will continue to press Pakistan on it and will try to go forward with the overall plan. And that will be the deciding factor. If for some reason Pakistan is not able to deliver on its end in terms of security, there are going to be changes. The Pakistan route is not the only route. There are other routes. And if they cannot be used, then there'll have to be alternatives.
All right. On that note, Aina Tangan in Beijing, Ahmad Shaheen in Pakistan, and Dilip Sinha in India, thank you so much for joining me on this discussion on Fine Print this evening. With that, it's a wrap on Fine Print, but news continues on WION. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.